Management establishes expectations of competence for key roles and other roles at management discretion to help the entity achieve its objectives. Competence is the qualification to carry out assigned responsibilities. It requires relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities which are gained largely from professional experience, training, and certifications. It is demonstrated by the behavior of individuals as they carry out their responsibilities. Management considers standards of conduct, assigned responsibility, and delegated authority when establishing expectations. Management establishes expectations of competence for key roles. Management may also establish expectations of competence for all personnel through policies within the entity's internal control system. Personnel need to possess and maintain a level of competence that allows them to accomplish their assigned responsibilities, as well as understand the importance of effective internal control. Holding individuals accountable to established policies by evaluating personnel's competence is integral to attracting, developing, and retaining individuals. Management evaluates competence of personnel across the entity in relation to established policies. Management acts as necessary to address any deviations from the established policies. The oversight body evaluates the competence of management as well as the competence overall of entity personnel. Recruitment, development, and retention of individuals. Management recruits, develops, and retains competent personnel to achieve the entity's objectives. Management considers the following: recruit, conduct procedures to determine whether a particular candidate fits the organizational needs and has the competence for the proposed role. Train, enable individuals to develop competencies appropriate. Enable individuals to develop competencies appropriate for key roles, reinforce standards of conduct, and tailor training based on the needs of the role. Mentor, provide guidance on the individual's performance based on standards of conduct and expectations of competence, align the individual's skills and expertise with the entity's objectives, and help personnel adapt to an evolving environment. Retain, provide incentives to motivate and reinforce expected levels of performance and desired conduct, including training and credentialing as appropriate. Succession and contingency plans and preparation. Management defines succession and contingency plans. Management defines succession and contingency plans for key roles to help the entity continue achieving its objectives. Succession plans address the entity's need to replace competent personnel over the long term, whereas contingency plans address the entity's need to respond to sudden personnel changes that would compromise the internal control system. Management defines succession plans for key roles, chooses succession candidates, and trains succession candidates to assume the key roles. If management relies on a service organization to fulfill the assigned responsibilities of key roles in the entity, management assesses whether the service organization can continue in these key roles, identifies other candidate organizations for the roles, and implements processes to enable knowledge sharing with the succession candidate organization. Management defines contingency plans for assigning Management defines contingency plans for assigning responsibilities if a key role in the entity is vacated without advance notice. The importance of the key role in the internal control system and the impact to the entity of its vacancy dictates the formality and depth of the contingency plan. Enforce accountability. Management should evaluate performance and hold individuals accountable for their internal control responsibilities. Enforcement of accountability. Consideration of excessive pressures. Enforcement of accountability. Management enforces the accountability of individuals performing their internal control responsibilities. Accountability is driven by the tone at the top and supported by the commitment to integrity and ethical values of organizational structure and expectations of entities which influence the control culture of the entity. Accountability for performance of internal control responsibility supports day-to-day decision-making attitudes and behaviors. Management holds personnel accountable through mechanisms such as performance appraisals and disciplinary actions. Management holds entity personnel accountable for performing their assigned internal control responsibilities. The oversight body in turn holds management accountable as well as the organization as a whole for its internal control responsibilities. If management establishes incentives, management recognizes that such actions can yield unintended consequences and evaluates incentives so that they align with the entity's standards of conduct. Management holds service organizations accountable for their assigned internal control responsibilities. Management may contract with service organizations to perform roles in the organizational structure. Management communicates to the service organization the objectives of the entity and the related risks, the entity's standards of conduct, the role of the service organization in the organizational structure, the assigned responsibilities and authorities of the role, and the expectations of competence for its role that will enable the service organization to perform its internal control responsibilities. Management, with oversight from the oversight body, takes corrective action as necessary to enforce accountability for internal control in the entity. These actions can range from informal feedback provided by the direct supervisors to disciplinary action taken by the oversight body, depending on the significance of the deficiency to the internal control system. Consideration of excessive pressures. Management adjusts excessive pressures on personnel in the entity. That pressure can appear in an entity because of goals established by management to meet objectives or cyclical demands of various processes performed in the entity, such as year-end financial statement preparation. Excessive pressure can result in personnel cutting orders to meet the established goals. Management is responsible for evaluating pressure on personnel to help personnel fulfill their assigned responsibilities in accordance with the entity's standards of conduct. Management can adjust excessive pressures using many different tools such as rebalancing workloads or increasing resource levels. Risk assessment. Overview. Having established an effective control environment, management assesses the risks facing the entity as it seeks to achieve its objectives. This assessment provides the basis for developing appropriate risk responses. Management assesses the risks the entity faces from both external and internal sources. Principles. Management should define objectives clearly to establish the identification of to enable the identification of risks and define risk tolerances. Management should identify, analyze, and respond to risk related to achieving the defined objectives. Management should consider the potential for fraud when identifying, analyzing, and responding to risks. Management should identify, analyze, and respond to significant changes that could impact the internal control system. Principle 6. Define objectives and risk tolerances. Management should define objectives clearly to enable the identification of risk and define risk tolerances. Definitions of objectives. Definitions of risk tolerances. Definitions of objectives. Management defines objectives in specific and measurable terms to enable the design of internal control For related risks, specific terms are fully and clearly set forth so they can be easily understood. Measurable terms allow for the assessment of performance toward achieving objectives. Objectives are initially set as part of the objective setting process and then refined as they are incorporated into the internal control system when management uses them to establish the control environment. Management defines objectives in specific terms so they are understood at all levels of the entity. This involves clearly defining what is to be achieved, who is to achieve it, how it will be achieved, and the time frames for achievement. All objectives can be broadly classified into one or more of three categories of operations, reporting, or compliance. Reporting objectives are further categorized as being either internal and external and financial or non-financial. Management defines objectives in alignment with the organization's mission, strategic plan, and performance goals. Management defines objectives in measurable terms so that performance toward achieving these objectives can be assessed. Measurable objectives are generally free of bias and do not require subjective judgments to dominate their measurement. Measurable objectives are also obtained in a quantitative or qualitative form that permits reasonably consistent measurement. Management considers external requirements and internal expectations. External requirements and internal expectations when defining objectives to enable the design of internal control. Legislators, regulators, and standard setting bodies set external requirements by establishing the laws, regulations, and standards of which the entity is required to comply. Management identifies, understands, and incorporates these requirements into the entity's objectives. Management sets internal expectations and requirements to the established standards of conduct, oversight, structure, organizational structure, and expectations of competence as part of the control environment. Management evaluates and, if necessary, revises defined objectives so that they are consistent with these requirements and expectations. This consistency enables management to identify and analyze risks associated with achieving the defined objectives. Management determines whether performance measures for the defined objectives are appropriate for evaluating the entity's performance and achieving those objectives. For qualitative objectives, performance measures may be a targeted percentage or numerical value. For qualitative objectives, management may need to design performance measures that indicate a level or degree of performance, such as milestones. Definitions of risk tolerances. Management defines risk tolerances for the defined objectives. Risk tolerance is the acceptable level of variation in performance relative to the achievement of objectives. Risk tolerances are initially set as part of the objective setting process. Management defines the risk tolerances for defined objectives by ensuring that the set levels of variation Management defines the risk tolerances for defined objectives by ensuring that the set levels of variation for performance measures are appropriate for the design of an internal control system. Management defines risk tolerances in specific and measurable terms so they are clearly stated and can be measured. Risk tolerance is often measured in the same terms as performance measures for the defined objectives. Depending on the category of objectives, risk tolerances may be expressed as follows. Operations objectives. Level of variation in performance in relation to risk. Non-financial reporting objectives. Level of precision and accuracy suitable for user needs. level of precision and accuracy suitable for use in using both qualitative and quantitative consideration meet the needs of non-financial report. User financial reporting objectives, judgments about materiality are made in light of surrounding circumstances involve both qualitative and quantitative considerations that are affected by the needs of financial report users and the set of nature of misstatement. Compliance objectives, concept of risk tolerance does not apply. An entity is either compliant or not compliant. Management also evaluates whether risk tolerances enable the appropriate design of internal control by considering whether they are consistent with requirements and expectations for the defined objectives. As in defining objectives, management considers the risk tolerances in the context of the entity's applicable laws, regulations, and standards, as well as the entity's standards of conduct, oversight structure, organizational structure, and expectations of competency. If risk tolerances for defined objectives are not consistent with these requirements and expectations, management revises the risk tolerances to achieve consistency. Principle 7. Identify, analyze, and respond to risk. Management should identify, analyze, and respond to risks related to achieving the defined objectives. Identification of risks and analyzation of response to risks. Management identifies risks throughout the entity Management identifies risks throughout the entity to provide a basis for analyzing risk. Risk assessment is the identification and analysis of risk related to achieving the defined objectives to form a basis for designing risk responses. To identify risks, management considers the types of risk that impact the entity. This includes both inherent and residual risk. Inherent risk is the risk to an entity in the absence of management's response to the risk. Residual risk is the risk that remains after management's response to inherent risk. Management's lack of response to either risk could cause deficiencies in the internal control system. Management considers all significant interactions within the entity and with external parties, changes within the entity's internal and external environment, and other internal and external factors to identify risk throughout the entity. Internal risk factors may include the complex structure of an entity's programs, its organizational structure, or the use of new technology and operational processes. External risk factors may include new or amended law, regulations, or professional standards, economic instability, or potential natural disasters. Management considers these factors at both the entity and transaction levels to comprehensively identify risks that affect defined objectives. Risk identification methods may include qualitative and quantitative ranking, activities forecasting, and strategic planning and consideration of deficiencies identified through audits and other assessments. Analysis of risk. Management analyzes the identified risks to estimate their significance, which provides a basis for responding to the risks. Significance refers to the effect on achieving a defined objective. Management estimates the significance of the identified risks to assess their effect Management estimates the significance of the identified risk to assess their effect on achieving the defined objectives. At both the entity and transaction levels, management estimates the significance of a risk by considering the magnitude of impact, likelihood of occurrence, and nature of the risk. Magnitude of impact refers to the likely magnitude of deficiency that could result from a risk and is affected by factors such as the size, pace, and duration of the risk's impact. Likelihood of occurrence refers to the level of possibility that a risk will occur. Nature of the risk involves factors such as the degree of subjectivity involved with the risk and whether the risk arises from fraud or from complex or unusual transactions. The oversight body may oversee management's estimates of significance so that risk tolerances have been properly defined. Risks may be analyzed on an individual basis. They're grouped into categories with related risks and analyzed collectively, regardless of whether risks are analyzed individually or collectively. Management considers the correlation among different risks or groups of risks when estimating the significance of specific risk analysis. Methodologies used can vary by entity because of different risks and entities' missions and the difficulty in qualitatively and quantitatively defining risk tolerances. Response to risk management designs responses to the analyzed risks. Management design responses to the analyzed risks. So that risks are within defined risk tolerance for the defined objective. Management designs overall risk responses for the analyzed risk based on the significance of the risk and defined risk tolerance. These risk responses may include the following: acceptance, no action is taken to respond to the risk based on the significance of the risk; avoidance, actions taken to stop the operational process or a part of the operational process causing the risk; reduction, actions taken to reduce the likelihood or magnitude of the risk; sharing, actions taken to transfer share risk across the entity or with external parties, such as insuring against losses. Based on the selective risk response, management designs the specific actions to respond to the analyzed risk. The nature and extent of risk response actions depend on the defined risk tolerance. Operating within the defined risk tolerance provides greater assurance that the entity will achieve its objectives. Performance measures are used to assess whether risk response actions enable the entity to operate within their defined risk tolerances. When risk response actions do not enable the entity to operate within the defined risk tolerances, management may need to revise risk responses or reconsider defined risk tolerances. Management may need to conduct periodic risk assessments to evaluate the effectiveness of the risk response actions. Principle 8, assess fraud risk. Management should consider the potential for fraud when identifying, analyzing, and responding to risks. Types of fraud, fraud risk factors, response to fraud risk. Types of fraud. Management considers the types of fraud that can occur within the entity to provide a basis for identifying fraud. Risk types of fraud are as follows: fraudulent financial reporting, intentional misstatements or omissions of amounts or disclosures in financial statements to deceive financial statement users. This can include intentional alteration of accounting records, misrepresentation of transactions, or intentional misapplication of accounting principles, misappropriation of assets, theft of an entity's assets. This can include theft of property, embezzlement of receipts, or fraudulent payments, corruption, bribery, and other illegal acts. In addition to fraud, management considers other forms of misconduct such as waste and abuse. Waste is the act of using or expending resources carelessly, extravagantly, or to no purpose. Abuse involves behavior that is deficient or improper when compared with behavior that a prudent person would consider reasonable and necessary operational practice given the facts and circumstances. This includes the misuse of authority or position for personal gain or for the benefit of another. Waste and abuse do not necessarily involve fraud or illegal acts. However, they may be an indication of potential fraud or illegal acts that may still impact the achievement of defined objectives. Fraud risk factors. Management considers fraud risk factors. Fraud risk factors do not necessarily indicate that fraud exists, but are often present when fraud occurs. Fraud risk factors include the following: incentive, pressure, opportunity, attitude, rationalization. Incentive, pressure. Management or other personnel have an incentive or are under pressure which provides a motive to commit fraud. That was funny. Opportunity, as circumstances exist such as the absence of controls, ineffective controls, or the ability of management to override controls that provide an opportunity to commit fraud. Attitude, rationalization. Individuals involved are able to rationalize committing fraud. Some individuals possess an attitude, character, or ethical values that allow them to knowingly and intentionally commit a dishonest act. Management uses the fraud risk factors to identify fraud risks. While fraud risk may be greatest when all three factors are present, one or more of these factors may indicate a fraud risk. Other information provided by internal and external parties can also be used to identify fraud risk. This may include allegations of fraud or suspected fraud reported by the Office of the Inspector General or internal auditors, personnel, or external parties that interact with the entity response to fraud risks. Management analyzes and responds to identified fraud risks so that they are effectively mitigated. Fraud risks are analyzed through the same risk analysis process performed for all identified risks. Management analyzes the identified fraud risk by estimating their significance both individually and in the aggregate to assess their effect on achieving the defined objectives. As part of analyzing fraud risk, management also assesses the risk of management override. Of controls the oversight body oversees management's assessments of fraud risk and the risk of management override of controls so that they are appropriate. Management response to fraud risk through the same risk process performed for all analyzed risk management designs an overall risk response and specific actions for responding to fraud risk. It may be possible to reduce or eliminate certain fraud risks by making changes to the entity's activities and processes. These changes may include stopping or reorganizing certain operations and reallocating roles among personnel to enhance segregation of duties. In addition to responding to fraud risk, management need to develop further responses to address the risk of management override of controls. Further, when fraud has been detected, the risk assessment process may need to be revised. Principle 9: identify, analyze, and respond to change. Management should identify, And response to significant changes that can impact the internal control system, identification of change, analysis of and response to change, identification of change as part of the of risk assessment or similar process management, identifies changes that could significantly impact the entity's internal control system, identifying, analyzing, and responding to changes similar to if not part of the entity's regular risk assessment process. However, change is discussed separately because it is critical to an effective internal control system and can often be overlooked or inadequately addressed in the normal course of operations. Conditions affecting the entity and its environment continually change. Management can anticipate and plan for significant changes by using a forward-looking process for identifying change. Management identifies on a timely basis significant changes to internal and external conditions that have already occurred or are expected to occur. Changes in internal conditions include changes to the entity's programs or activities, oversight, structure, organizational structure, personnel, and technology. Changes in external conditions include changes in the governmental, economic, technological, legal, regulatory, and physical environments. As identified significant changes are communicated across the entity through established reporting lines to appropriate personnel. Analysis and respond to changes as part of risk assessment or a similar process. Management analyzes and responds to identified changes. And relatedness in order to maintain an effective internal control system. Changes in conditions affecting the entity and its environment often require changes to the entity's internal control system, as existing controls may not be effective for meeting objectives or addressing risks under changed conditions. Management analyzes the effect of identified changes on the internal control system. And responds by revising the internal control system on a timely basis when necessary to maintain its effectiveness. Further, changing conditions often prompt new risks or changes to existing risks that need to be assessed. As part of analyzing and responding to change, management performs a risk assessment to identify, analyze, and respond to any new risks prompted by the changes. Additionally, existing risks may require further assessment to determine whether the defined risk tolerances and risk responses need to be revised. Control activities. Overview. Control activities are the actions management establishes through policies and procedures to achieve objectives and respond to risks in the internal control system, which includes the entity's information system principles management. Should design control activities to achieve objectives and respond to risk. Management should design the entity's information system and related control activities to achieve objectives and respond to risk. Management should implement control activities through policies. Design control activities. Management should design control activities to achieve objectives and respond to risks. Response to objectives and risks is design of appropriate types of control activities, design of control activities at various levels, segregation of duty. Response to objectives and risks. Management designs control activities in response to the entity's objectives and risks to achieve an effective internal control system. Control activities are the policies, procedures, techniques, and mechanisms that enforce management's directives to achieve the entity's objectives and address related risks as part of the control environment component. Management defines responsibilities, assigns them to key roles, and delegates authority to achieve the entity's objectives as part of the risk assessment component. Management identifies the risks related to the entity's objectives, including its service organizations, the entity's risk tolerance, and risk responses. Management designs control activities to fulfill defined responsibilities and address identified risk responses. Design of appropriate types of control activities. Management designs appropriate types of controls activities for the entity's internal control system. Control activities help management fulfill responsibilities and address identified risk responses in the internal control system. The common control activity categories listed in Figure 6 are meant only to illustrate the range and variety of control activities that may be useful to management. The list is not all inclusive and may not include particular control activities that an entity may need. Examples of common categories of control activities: top-level reviews of actual performance, reviews by management at the functional or activity level, management of human capital, controls over information processing, physical control over vulnerable assets, establishment and review of performance measures and indicators, segregation of duties, proper execution of transactions, accurate and timely recording of transactions. Access restrictions to an accountability for resources and access appropriate documentation of transactions and internal control. Oh my god. Top-level reviews of actual performance. Management tracks major entity achievements and compares these to the plans, goals, and objectives set by the entity. Reviews by management at the functional or activity level. Management compares actual performance to planned or expected results throughout the organization and analyze significant differences. Management of human capital. Effective management of an entity's workforce, its human capital, is essential to achieving results and an important part of internal control. Only when the right personnel for the job are on board and are provided the right training, tools, structure, incentives, and responsibilities is operational success possible. Management continually assesses the knowledge, skills, and ability needs of the entity so that the entity is able to obtain a workforce that has the required knowledge, skills, and abilities to achieve organizational goals. Training is aimed at developing and retaining employee knowledge, skills, and abilities to meet changing organizational needs. Management provides qualified and continuous supervision so that internal control objectives are achieved. Management supervision. Management designs a performance system supplemented by an effective reward system to help employees understand the connection between their performance and the entity's success. As part of its human capital planning, management also considers how best to retain Valuable employees plan for their eventual departure and maintain a continuity of needed skills and abilities. Controls over information processing. A variety of control activities are used in information processing. Examples include edit checks of data entered, accounting for transactions in numerical sequences, comparing file totals with control accounts, and controlling access to data files and programs. Physical control over vulnerable assets management establishes internal management establishes physical control to secure and safeguard vulnerable assets. Examples include security for unlimited access to assets such as cash, securities, inventories, and equipment that might be vulnerable to risk of loss or unauthorized use. Management periodically counts and compares such assets to control records. Establishment and review of performance measures and indicators. Management establishes activities to monitor performance measures and indicators. These may include comparisons and assessments relating different sets of data to one another so that analyses of the relationships can be made and appropriate actions taken. Management designs controls aimed at validating the propriety and integrity of both entity and individual performance measures and indicators. Segregation of duties. Management divides or segregates key duties and responsibilities among different people to reduce the risk of error, misuse, or fraud. This includes separating the responsibilities for authorizing transactions, processing and recording them, reviewing the transactions, and handling any related assets so that no one individual controls all key aspects of a transaction or event. Proper execution of transactions. Transactions are authorized and executed only by persons acting within the scope of their authority. This is the principal means of assuring that only valid transactions to exchange, transfer, use, or commit resources are initiated or entered into. Management clearly communicates authorizations to personnel. Oh, great. Accurate and timely recording of transactions. Transactions are promptly recorded to maintain the relevance and values of management and controlling operations and making decisions. This applies to the entire process or life cycle of a transaction or event, from its initiation and authorization through its final classification and summary records. In addition, management designs control activities so that all transactions are completely and accurately recorded. Access restrictions to and accountability for resources and records. Management limits access to resources and records to authorized individuals and assigns and maintains accountability for their custody and use. Management may periodically compare resources with the recorded accountability to help reduce the risk of errors, fraud, misuse, or unauthorized alteration. Appropriate documentation of transactions. And internal control. Management clearly communicates internal control. Management clearly documents internal control in all transactions and other significant events in a manner that allows the documentation to be readily available for examination. The documentation may appear in management directives, administrative policies, or operating manuals in either paper or electronic form. Documentation and records are properly managed and maintained, and entities' internal control is flexible to allow management to tailor control activities to meet the entity's special needs. The specific control activities used by a given entity may be different from those used by others based on a number of factors. These factors can include specific threats the entity faces and risks. They encourage differences in objectives, managerial judgment, size, and complexity of the entity, operational environment, sensitivity and value of data, and requirements for system reliability, availability, and performance. Control activities can be either preventative or detective. The main difference between preventative and detective control activities is the timing of a control activity within an entity's operations. A preventative control activity prevents an entity from failing to achieve an objective or address a risk. A detective control activity discovers when an entity is not achieving an objective or addressing a risk before the entity's operation has concluded, and corrects the action so that the entity achieves the objective or addresses the risk. Management evaluates the purpose of the control activity as well as the effect a deficiency would have on the entity in achieving its objectives. If the control activity is for a significant purpose or the impact of a deficiency would be significant to achieving the entity's objectives. Management may design both preventative and detective control activities. Management control activities can be implemented in either an automated or a manual manner. Automated control activities are either wholly or partially automated through the entity's information technology. Manual control activities are performed by individuals with minor use of the entity's information technology. Automated control activities tend to be more reliable because they are less susceptible to human error and are typically more efficient if the entity relies on information technology in its operations. Management designs control activities so that the information technology continues to operate properly. Design of control activities Management designs control activities at the appropriate levels in the organizational structure. Management designs control activities for the appropriate coverage of objectives and risks in the operations. Operational processes management design operational processes transform inputs into outputs to achieve the organization's objectives. Management designs entity-level control activities, transaction control activities, or both, depending on the level of precision needed so that the entity meets its objectives and addresses related risks. Entity-level controls are controls that have a pervasive effect on an entity's internal control system. And may pertain to multiple components. Entity-level controls may include controls related to the entity's risk assessment process, control environment, service organizations, management, override, and monitoring transaction control activities or actions built directly into operational processes to support the entity in achieving its objectives and addressing related risks. Transactions tends to be associated with financial processes, e.g. payables transactions, while activities is more generally applied to operational or compliance processes. For the purposes of this standard, transactions covers both definitions. Management may design a variety of transaction control activities. You would think he'd be able to post the grade for that test pretty quickly. He literally made it a Scantron test. All he has to do is scan. Do you have to scan each paper individually? You might have to manually enter in the scores, but. And why hasn't he posted the grade for the other test yet? I only have one quote-unquote regular class left. Please don't call on me tomorrow. I'm just kind of assuming I'm not going to have the presentation prepared by tomorrow. If I somehow manage to finish this paper by 10 p.m., then I should make an effort to have the presentation ready as well. And if I actually somehow manage to have it ready, then I should volunteer myself to present tomorrow so that I have the whole weekend to work on other stuff. Design activities for the information system. Management should design the entity's information system and related control activities to achieve objectives and respond to risks. Design of the entity's information system. Design of appropriate types of control activities. Design of information technology infrastructure. Design of security management. Design of information technology. Management designs the entity's information system to respond to the entity's objectives and risks. Management designs the entity's information system. Can you please just post the grade to our test already? Yeah, he's going to do it today. The other test hasn't been posted yet, so why would that one be posted quickly? It's just a multiple choice Scantron test. So it's designed. Well, actually, the easiest way to have it be done would be on Canvas. I don't know why I didn't just make it on Canvas. I guess because then it's cheating possibility, and we'd have to get a thingy. Management designs the entity's information system to obtain and process information. To meet each operational process information requirements and to respond to the entity's objectives and risk and information system is the people, processes, data, and technology that management organizes to obtain, communicate, or dispose of information. An information system represents the life cycle of information used for the entity's operational processes that enables the entity to obtain, store, and process quality information. The information system includes both manual and technology-enabled information processes. Technology-enabled information processes are commonly referred to as information technology. As part of the control environment component, management defines responsibilities, assigns them to key roles, and delegates authority to achieve the entity's objectives. As part of the risk assessment component, management identifies the risk related to the entity's objectives, including its service organizations, the entity's risk tolerance, and risk responses. Management designs control activities to fulfill define responsibilities and address the identified risk responses. Management designs the entity's information system and the use of information technology by considering the defined information requirements for each of the entity's operational processes. Information technology enables information related to operational process to become available to the entity on a timely basis. Additionally, information technology may enhance internal control over security and confidentiality of information by appropriately restricting access to all information used by technology applies specific types of control activities. Information technology is not a standalone control consideration. It is an integral part of most control activities. Management also evaluates information processing objectives. To meet the defined information requirements, information processing objectives may include following: completeness, transactions that are recorded and not understated; accuracy, transactions are recorded at the correct amount in the right account and on a timely basis at each stage of processing; validity, recorded transactions represent economic events that actually occurred and were executed according to prescribed procedures; types of appropriate design of appropriate types of control activities. Management designs appropriate types of control activities in the entity's information system for coverage of information processing objectives. For operational process for information systems, there are two main types of control activities: general and application control activities. Information system general control at the entity-wide system and application level are the policies and procedures that apply to all or a large segment of an entity's information systems. General controls facilitate the proper operation of information systems by creating the environment for proper operation of application controls. General controls include security management, logistical and physical access, configuration management, segregation of duties and contingency planning, application controls. Those controls that are incorporated directly into computer applications to achieve validity, completeness, accuracy, and confidentiality of transactions and data during application processing. Application controls over input, processing, output, master file interface, and data management system controls. Design of information technology infrastructure. Design of information tech. Management designs control activities over the information technology infrastructure to support the completeness, accuracy, and validity of information processing. By information technology requires an infrastructure in which to operate, including communication networks for linking information technologies, computing resources for applications to operate, and electricity to power the information technology and entities. Information technology infrastructure can be complex and may be shared by different units within the entity or outsourced either to service organizations or to location independent. Technology services management evaluates the objectives of the entity and related risks in designing and control activities for the information technology infrastructure. Management continues to evaluate changes in the use of information technology and designs new control activities when these changes are incorporated into the entity's information technology infrastructure. Management also designs control activities needed to maintain the information technology infrastructure. Maintaining technology often includes backup and recovery procedures as well as continuity of operations plans depending on the risks and consequences of a full or partial power systems outage. Design of security management. Management designs control activities for security management of the entity's information system for appropriate access by internal and external sources to protect the entity's information system. Objectives for security management include confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality means that data, reports, and other outputs are safeguarded against unauthorized access. Integrity means that information is safeguarded against improper modification or destruction, which includes ensuring information's non-repudiation and authenticity. Availability means that data, reports, and other relevant information are available to users when needed. Security management includes the information processes and control activities related to access rights in an entity's information technology, including thus the ability to execute transactions. Security management includes access rights across various levels of data, operating system software, network, application, and physical layers. Management designs control activities over access. Management designs control activities over access to protect an entity from inappropriate access and unauthorized use of the system. These control activities support appropriate segregation of duties by preventing unauthorized use of and changes to the system. Data and program integrity are protected from malicious intent, someone breaking into the technology to commit fraud, vandalism, or terrorism, or error. Management evaluates security threats to information technology, which can be from both internal and external sources. External threats are particularly important for entities that depend on telecommunications networks and the internet. External threats have become prevalent in today's highly interconnected business environments, and continual effort is required to address these risks. Internal threats may come from former or disgruntled employees. They pose unique risks because they may be both motivated to work against the entity and better equipped to succeed in carrying out a malicious act, as they have greater access to and knowledge of the entity's security management systems and processes. Management designs control activities to limit user access to information technology through authorization control activities, such as providing a unique user identification or token to authorize users. These control activities may restrict authorized users to the applications or functions commensurate with their assigned responsibilities. Supporting an appropriate segregation of duties. Management designs other control activities to promptly update access rights when employees change job functions or or leave the entity. Management also designs control activities for access rights when different information technology elements are connected to each other. Design of information technology, acquisition, development, and management designs and control activities over the acquisition, development, and maintenance of information technology. Management may use a systems development life cycle framework in designing control activities, and a systems development life cycle provides a structure for a new information technology design by outlining specific phases and documenting requirements, approvals, and checkpoints within control activities over the acquisition, development, and maintenance of technology through an SDLC. Management designs control activities over changes to technologies. This may involve requiring authorization of change requests, reviewing the changes, approvals, and testing results, and designing protocols to determine whether changes are made properly depending on the size and complexity of the entity. Development of information technology and changes to the information technology may be included in one SDLC or two separate methodologies. Management evaluates the objectives and risks of the new technology in designing control activities over its SDLC. Management may acquire information technology through packaged software from vendors. Management incorporates methodologies for the acquisition of vendor packages into its information technology development and designs control activities over their selection. Ongoing development and maintenance control activities for the development, maintenance, control activities for the development, maintenance, and change of application software, prevent unauthorized programs or modifications to existing programs, and other alternatives. Outsourcing the development of information technology to service organizations. As for an SDLC developed internally, management designs and control activities to meet objectives and address related risk. Management also evaluates the unique risks that using a service organization presents for the completeness, accuracy, and validity of information submitted to and received from the service organization. Principle 12. Implement control activities. Management should implement control activities through policies, documentation of responsibilities through policies, periodic review of control activities, documentation of responsibilities through policies. Management documents in policies the internal control responsibilities of the organization. Management documents in policies for each unit its responsibility for operational processes, objectives, and related risks and control activity design, implementation, and operating effectiveness. Each unit, with guidance from management, determines the policies necessary to operate the process based on the objectives and related risks for the operational process. Each unit also documents policies in the appropriate level of detail to allow management to effectively monitor the control activity. Those in key roles for the unit may further define policies through day-to-day procedures depending on the rate of change in the operating environment and complexity of the operational process. Procedures may include the timing of when a control activity occurs and any follow-up corrective actions to be performed by competent personnel. If deficiencies are identified, management communicates to personnel the policies and procedures so that personnel can implement the control activities or their assigned responsibilities. Periodic review of control activities. Management periodically reviews policies, procedures, and related control activities for continued relevance and effectiveness. In achieving the entity's objectives or addressing related risk if there is a significant change in an entity's process. The management reviews this process in a timely manner after the change to determine that the control activities are designed and implemented appropriately. That changes may occur in personnel, operational processes, or information technology. Regulators, legislators, and in the federal environment, the Office of Management and Budget and the Department of the Treasury may also change either an entity's objectives or how an entity is to achieve an objective. Management considers these changes in its periodic review. Information and communication over. What? Oh, come on! Why did I think it was... Gosh dang it! Oh, come on! It's page 68 in the book version of this, not the PDF version. Dang it! That means I have to read all the way to page 74, not 68. 75, actually. What the heck? 75. Well, 75 is barely anything. Gosh dang it. I actually have to read to page 75, not page 68. Gotta be kidding me. Gotta be kidding me. Oh. I was just looking at the page number and the table of contents, but that doesn't align with the page in the PDF. Yeah. Dang it, I have 11 pages. Come on. Come on. Management uses quality information to support the internal control system. Effective information and communication are vital for an entity to achieve its objectives. Entity management needs access to relevant and reliable communication related to internal as well as external events. Principles management should use quality information to achieve the entity's objectives. Management should internally communicate the necessary quality information to achieve the entity's objectives. Management should externally communicate the necessary quality information to achieve the entity's objectives. Use quality information. Management should use quality information to achieve the entity's objectives. Identification of information requirements. Relevant data from reliable sources, data processed into quality information, identification of information requirements. Management designs a process that uses the entity's objectives and related risks to identify the information requirements needed to achieve the objectives and address the risk information requirements. Consider the expectations of both internal and external users. Management defines the identified information requirements at the relevant level and requisite specificity for appropriate personnel. Management identifies information requirements in an iterative and ongoing process that occurs throughout an effective internal control system. As change in the entity and its objectives and risks occurs, management changes information requirements as needed to meet those modified objectives and address these modified risks. Relevant data from reliable sources. Management obtains relevant data from reliable internal and external sources in a timely manner based on the identified information requirements. Relevant data have a logical connection with or bearing upon the identified information requirements. Reliable internal and external sources provide data that are reasonably free from error and bias and faithfully represent what they purport to represent. Management evaluates both internal and external sources of data for reliability. Sources of data can be operational, financial, or compliance related. Management obtains data on a timely basis so that they can be used for effective monitoring. Data processed into quality information. Management processes the obtained data into quality information that supports the internal control system. This involves processing data into information and then evaluating the processed information so that it is quality information. Quality information meets the identified information requirements. When relevant data from reliable sources are used, quality information is appropriate, current, complete, accurate, accessible, and provided on a timely basis. Management considers these characteristics as well as the information processing objectives in evaluating processed information and makes revisions when necessary so that the information is quality information. Management uses the quality information to make informed decisions and evaluate the entity's performance in achieving key objectives and addressing risk management processes. Relevant data from reliable sources into quality information within the entity's information system. An information system is the people, processes, data, and technology that management organizes to obtain, communicate, or dispose of information. Principle 14. Communicate internally. Management should internally communicate the necessary quality information to achieve the entity's objectives. Communication throughout the entity. Appropriate methods of communication. Communication throughout the entity. Management communicates quality information throughout the entity, usually established reporting lines. Quality information is communicated down, across, up, and around reporting lines to all levels of the entity. Management communicates quality information down and across reporting lines to enable personnel to perform key roles in achieving objectives, addressing risks, and supporting the internal control system. In these communications, management assigns the internal control responsibilities for key roles. Management receives quality information about the entity's operational processes that flows up the reporting lines from personnel to help management achieve the entity's objectives. The oversight body receives quality information that flows up the reporting lines from management and personnel. Information relating to internal control communicated to the oversight body includes significant matters about adherence to changes in or issues arising from the internal control system. This upward communication is necessary for the effective oversight of internal control. Personnel use separate reporting lines to go around upward reporting lines. When these lines are compromised, laws and regulations may require entities to establish separate lines of communication, such as whistleblower and ethics hotlines for communicating confidential information. Management informs employees of these separate reporting lines, how they operate, how they are to be used, and how the information will remain confidential. Appropriate methods of communication. Management selects appropriate methods to communicate internally. Management considers a variety of factors in selecting an appropriate method of communication. Some factors to consider follow: audience, the intended recipients of the communication, nature of information, the purpose and type of information being communicated, availability, information readily available to the audience when needed, cost, the resources used to communicate the information, legal or regulatory requirements and laws and regulations that may impact communication. Based on consideration of the factors, management selects appropriate methods of communication, such as written document in hard copy or electronic format, or a face-to-face meeting. Management periodically evaluates the entity's methods of communication so that the organization has the appropriate tools to communicate quality information throughout the entity on a timely basis. Principle 15. Communicate externally. Management should externally communicate the necessary quality information to achieve the entity's objectives. Communication with external parties. Appropriate methods of communication. Management communicates with and obtains quality information from external parties using established reporting lines. Open two-way external reporting lines allow for this communication. External parties include suppliers, contractors, service organizations, regulators, external auditors, government entities, and the general public. Management communicates quality information externally through reporting lines so that external parties can help the entity achieve its objectives and address related risks. Management includes in these communications information relating to the entity's events and activities that impact the internal control system. Management receives information through reporting lines. Management receives communicate information through reporting lines from external parties. Information communicated to management includes significant values relating to risks, changes, or issues that impact the entity's internal control system. This communication is necessary for the effective operation of internal control. Management evaluates external information received against the characteristics of quality information and information processing objectives, and takes any necessary actions so that the information is quality information. The oversight body receives information through reporting lines from external parties. Information communicated to the oversight body includes significant matters relating to risks, changes, or issues that impact the entity's internal control system. This communication is necessary for the effective oversight of internal control. External parties use separate reporting lines. When external reporting lines are compromised, laws and regulations may require entities to establish separate lines of communication, such as whistleblower and ethics outlines for communicating confidential information. Management informs external parties of these separate reporting lines, how they operate, and how they are used, and how information will remain confidential. Appropriate methods of communication management. Oh, come on. All of this stuff is repeated. This is all repeated. Like, they really had to repeat this again? They already said this exact same thing here. Come on. In fact, the whole separating between external and internal is kind of redundant. Like, they made a whole principle for each one. They could have just been combined into one. Management selects appropriate methods to communicate externally. Management considers a variety of factors in selecting an appropriate method of communication. Some factors they consider follow: audience and nature, information availability, cost, legal or regulatory requirements. Based on consideration of the factors, management selects appropriate methods of communication, such as a written document or face-to-face material activity evaluations. Now we have 5 pages left. Well, 4, because the 75 is barely anything on it. So, internal control is a dynamic process that has to be adapted continually to the risk and changes an entity faces. Monitoring the internal control system is essential in helping internal control remain aligned. In helping the internal control remain aligned with changing objectives, environment, laws, resources, and risks, internal control monitoring assesses the quality of performance over time and promptly resolves the findings of audits and other reviews. Corrective actions are a necessary complement to control activities in order to achieve objectives. Principles: management should establish and operate monitoring activities to monitor the internal control system, evaluate the results. Management should remediate identified internal control deficiencies on a timely basis. Oh, come on, we still have 4 pages. Dude, way! No, it's still 4. Perform monitoring activities. Management should establish and operate monitoring activities to monitor the internal control system, evaluate the results. Establishment of a baseline internal control system monitoring, evaluation of results. Establishment of a baseline. Management establishes a baseline to monitor the internal control system. The baseline is the current state of the internal control system compared against management's design of the internal control system. The baseline represents the difference between the criteria of the design of the internal control system and condition of the internal control system at a specific point in time. In other words, the baseline consists of issues and deficiencies identified in an entity's internal control system. Once established, management can use the baseline as criteria in evaluating the internal control system and make changes to reduce the difference between the criteria and condition. Management reduces this difference in one of two ways. Management either changes the design of the internal control system to better address the objectives and risks of the entity, or improves the operating effectiveness of the internal control system. As part of monitoring, management determines when to revise the baseline to reflect changes in the internal control system. Internal control system monitoring. Management monitors the internal control system through ongoing monitoring and separate evaluations. Ongoing monitoring is built into the entity's operations, performed continually and responsive to change. Separate evaluations are used periodically and may provide feedback on the effectiveness of ongoing monitoring. Management performs ongoing monitoring of the design and operating effectiveness of the internal control system as part of the normal course of operations. Ongoing monitoring includes regular management and supervisory activities, comparisons, reconciliations, and other routine actions. Ongoing monitoring may include automated tools which can increase objectivity and efficiency by electronically compiling evaluations of controls and transactions. Management uses separate evaluations to monitor the design and operating effectiveness of the internal control system at a specific time or of a specific function or process. The scope and frequency of separate evaluations depend primarily on the assessment of risks, effectiveness of ongoing monitoring, and rate of change within the entity and its environment. Separate evaluations may take the form of self-assessments, which include cross-operating unit or cross-functional evaluations. Separate evaluations also include audits and other evaluations that may involve the review of control design and direct testing of internal control. These audits and other evaluations may be mandated by law and are performed by internal auditors, external auditors, the inspectors general, and other external reviewers. Separate evaluations provide greater objectivity when performed by reviewers who do not have responsibility for the activities being evaluated. Management retains responsibility for monitoring the effectiveness of internal control over the assigned processes performed by service organizations. Management uses ongoing monitoring, separate evaluations, or a combination of the two to obtain reasonable assurance of the operating effectiveness. Of the service organization's internal controls over the assigned process, monitoring activities related to service organizations. May include the use of work performed by external parties such as service auditors and review by management. Evaluation of results. Management evaluates and documents the results of ongoing monitoring and separate evaluations to identify internal control issues. Management uses this evaluation to determine the effectiveness of the internal control system. Differences between the results of monitoring activities and the previously established baseline may indicate internal control issues, including undocumented changes in the internal control system or potential internal control deficiencies. Management identifies changes in the internal control system that either have occurred or are needed because of changes in the entity and its environment. External parties can also help management identify issues in the internal control system. For example, complaints from the general public and regulator comments may indicate areas in the internal control system that need improvement. Management considers whether current controls address the identified issues and modifies controls if necessary. Principle 17, evaluate issues and remediate deficiencies. Oh, come on. Management should remediate and identify internal control deficiencies on a timely basis. Reporting of issues, evaluation of issues, corrective actions, reporting of issues. Personnel report internal control issues through established reporting lines to the appropriate internal and external parties on a timely basis to enable the entity to properly evaluate those issues. Personnel may identify internal control issues while performing their assigned internal control responsibilities. Personnel communicate these issues internally to the person in the key role responsible for the internal control or associated process, and when appropriate, to at least one level of management above that individual. Depending on the nature of the issues, personnel may consider reporting certain issues to the oversight body. Such issues may include issues that cut across the organizational structure or extend outside the entity to service organizations, contractors, or suppliers, and issues that may not be remediated because of the interests of management, such as sensitive information regarding fraud or other illegal acts. Depending on the entity's regulatory or compliance requirements, the entity may also be required to report issues externally to appropriate external parties, such as the legislators, regulators, and standard-setting bodies that establish laws, rules, regulations, and standards to which the entity is subject. Evaluation of issues. Management evaluates and documents internal control issues and determines appropriate corrective actions for internal control deficiencies on a timely basis. Management evaluates issues identified through monitoring activities or reported by personnel to determine whether any of the issues rise to the level of an internal control deficiency. Internal control deficiencies require further evaluation and remediation by management. An internal control deficiency can be in the design, implementation, or operating effectiveness of the internal control and its related process. Management determines from the type of internal control deficiency the appropriate corrective actions to remediate the internal control deficiency on a timely basis. Management assigns responsibility and delegates authority to remediate the internal control deficiency. Corrective actions. Management completes and documents corrective actions to remediate internal control deficiencies on a timely basis. These corrective actions include resolution of audit findings. Depending on the nature of the deficiency, either the oversight body or management oversees the prompt remediation of deficiencies by communicating the corrective actions to the appropriate level of the organizational structure and delegating authority for completing corrective actions to appropriate personnel. The audit resolution process begins when audit or other review results are reported to management and is completed only after action has been taken that corrects identified deficiencies, produces improvements, or demonstrates that the findings and recommendations do not warrant management action. Management, with oversight from the oversight body, monitors the status of remediation efforts so that they are completed on a timely basis. That was funny.